So, a word about this project, this Margaret Harshaw project of her students talking about her teaching and how she taught, what she taught, and how she taught. I thought of this more than 10 years ago. This is something I thought was very important to do. She always admonished us, do not write a book about my teaching because you can't learn to sing from a book, which is certainly true. You can't. She probably never considered the possibility that somebody could make a video and explain things. This was just, yes, there's television and all that, but during her lifetime, it probably would not have been something she would have thought of. I'm not sure why she wanted us to not relay this information to, in a sense, the world. Obviously, those of us who teach, and she certainly had no problem with anyone teaching, we would teach her pedagogy, her technique, which wasn't, as she said, her technique. It came from the Garcias, but in that sense, it wasn't a secret anyway. If she had a superpower, it was knowing how to teach, knowing how to think, what does this student need, and how can I explain this to this student and make their voice better? It would be a terrible shame and detrimental to the world of singing if what she taught and how she taught, the things she said and the way she said them, if those were lost to eternity. I'm thinking about some doctoral student in 2075 that decides to do a thesis on great voice teachers of the late 20th century. They'll find information about who Margaret Harshaw wasn't. She was considered so highly, regarded so highly, but there won't be anything that they can see, well, what did she teach? And I think that would be a terrible loss to the world. It would be a mark on her legacy. We need to put something in some kind of concrete form that people can learn from, that they can understand. And will it be misunderstood by some? Yeah, surely it will be. But if it's not out there, it will be understood by no one except those of us who have experienced it and pass it along to our students, but then they will pass it along to their students and so forth. And it's like a game of telephone. After a while, it gets diluted. And I feel very lucky that I was, third in line to the Garcias. That's an amazing place to be, and all of us who studied with her were in that situation. I don't think we can keep this light under a basket. It deserves to be told, and I think if she sincerely would have not liked for this to happen, then I think she's wrong about that. She was not a perfect person. None of us are, and if for some odd reason she did not want this to be known by other people, why did she teach it to us? It just makes no sense. So I'm very happy for everybody who has been involved in this project to have shared their experiences and their knowledge and their own stories with me, with us, with you. So that's all I have to say about this. This is a project I have had in my mind for a long time and finally just decided now was the time to do it.
And I remember her wanting me to put my hands on her body, below the waist and on her one side of her ribs. And she said, this is going to get very intimate. And she'd take my hand, put it on her stomach, then push it down a little bit further, and she would breathe. And that was extremely helpful for me. That specifically, I remember. There's another thing that she did that came to mind where this wasn't the actual breathing. But after you had breathed and you started singing, I would listen to recordings of my lessons and think, what is that noise? Was there an animal in the studio? Because I would hear her, in the background to try to trigger a sensation. And it worked, but I wasn't even aware of her doing it in the lesson. It just was a trigger, and I would hear it afterwards. What was that? But I think it went along with the low breath.
As far as breath, it was the diaphragm was to go as low as it could, and you were to try to keep it as low as you could for as long as you could. Try to stay relaxed, but low, full breath, and keep that breath in as much as you can, and not let the breath be the determinant, but the tone be the determinant. And she alluded to the fact that, the old bel canto school was that you would take a candle and you would sing and the flame would not flicker at all. And that was her point, that it wasn't the breath that carried, it was the sound that carried. Yeah. No pushing, no pushing, no pushing.
She taught me that, to breathe into my back and to really breathe low into my body. I remember her saying, now I'm going to place your hand on my bodice. Don't be alarmed. I wear a very heavy undergarment. And this is what a support feels like, that feeling of leaning into your back. I remember her describing the lower bottom ribs were like wearing a bolero jacket, and those back ribs are moving continually, that there's this sense of leaning into your body. And I know as I was preparing for the Met auditions, she had me come in under any circumstance and sing the triplets from Parto Parto. And I can recall, watching her as I was going up the scale, there was a sense of this and this and this, and as you go up into the top, and I can just see her sitting on her chair, reminding me to feel that sense of expansion and movement in my body. That, and making sure that I was feeling that sense of that my belly was, my navel was pulling toward my spine, she would say. And that was kind of it. She didn't ever she used to draw pictures of the rib cage and stuff, but never did she have any, pictures of lungs and rib cage and diaphragm, none of that stuff in her studio. It was really about, this is what it feels like, to really connect to your body and to really stay. She would talk about appoggio, and that there's a sense of like you have a inner tube around you, and the inner tube is continually leaning out. That was probably, and then, because I studied with her for 25 some years. I did 4 years at Indiana, and then she would come to Princeton every summer, and I would have lessons with her after she had taught all day, after I'd watched her master classes and taught all day. And sometimes her terminology changed a little bit. I remember in Princeton, she would talk about having me feel a sense of a sense of pull, and a sense of like I had two thumbs under my sternum doing this the whole time. So, what she taught me when I was a master's student in Indiana kind of then evolved later on in her life in Princeton. Appoggiare means to lean. There's a sense of the leaning sensation. It's not, it's not to hold anything. I have that Pilates wheel right here on the music stand. Did I have somebody inhale, and then you feel a sense of resistance to let the Pilates wheel go back to rest, and that immediately engages the core of your body. So to me, I feel like appoggio it's movable. It's not static.
Right.
But I think in her way, that's as she would sit in her chair and demonstrate, that's how I sort of felt it. What we do as voice teachers is very strange. We're trying to teach somebody how something tastes.
Well, back to that first lesson, I came in probably the highest breather on the the United States, and she introduced me to the first term, low breath, and she talked about. I'd been taught by essentially a choral director, and the only word he knew for breath support was diaphragm, 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 and suddenly I heard abdominal muscles and belly button and low musculature, and I took to that pretty well because she linked it with something that I was, as a basso, I was sorely in need of, and that was rib expansion. I mean, I don't separate, and I don't think Harshaw separated breath technique and rib expansion. I think they go hand in glove. I hope my colleagues agree with me on that. But anyway, that's what I believe now, and that's what I did for 40 years of singing. I was taught, and this was one thing that drove her crazy with me. My previous teacher had taught when I take a breath that I swell the belly as much as possible, and then as I sing the phrase, the belly moves in, so it's there. And he would even have me lean against a book and push myself back from a book. And Harshaw would exclaim, "You're going to get a hiatal hernia doing that." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And so I had to completely relearn the taking of the breath so that the abdominal wall moved in and then moved up. And she was always after me from the first lesson to the last lesson, get it lower, move it lower toward the pelvis, low as possibly can. So low abdominal breath accompanied by, and what I think profoundly affected me along that same area of technique was the lower back, where those bottom back ribs that I learned that's where the goodies are. That's where the richness of my sound emanated from. And so I took to that pretty well. I must have taken to it instantly because that first audition at IU, when I was trying my new breath support for the very first time in public, I got a lot of roles that first season, and so somebody heard something, and I blame her.
Well, when I that was the thing that I guess with many people that I needed to work on the most, because when I got to Indiana to study with her, I don't know if you know, but I was supposed to have worked with Miss Harshaw at Curtis Institute, and so she and I were a little bit familiar with each other when I got there, and she was familiar with my singing. And I had learned all wrong how to breathe. And I did things with my body. I still am in awe of whatever I was doing. I don't know what it was, but somehow in my quest to be the perfect student, which I always had that desire to be, a wonderful student, before I got to Miss Harshaw, it was like I had this basketball or some kind of ball that came sticking out right here whenever I took a breath. And I'm sure if I kept that up, I would probably had some kind of ripped something, because I was pushing on things that shouldn't be pushed on. Yeah. And so Miss Harshaw talked to me a lot about my breath, and that was it was frustrating for both of us. It was hard because it took me a couple of years before I could take a low, deep breath and feel that expansion, and then while I made sound, not push out here, because I was so trained to do that. And so to be able to slowly pull that in took a long, long, long time. And that's what we spent the most time working on. And I remember her telling me, this is sort of an interesting story, that when she was singing with Zinka Milanoff, that she felt she could watch her, and watch her back expand, and how that was an incredible sight to see Zinka Milanoff's back expand, and that I had to learn to do that. And I remember singing at San Francisco Opera when Leontine Price came for Leonora, the Trovatore, and standing there, and it made me I connected with Miss Harshaw so much, because I was standing. I wasn't in the performance, but I was during the performance. I could stand in the wings and watch Leontine Price's back while she sang that. What is that? D'amor solada. That second aria. That song. Oh my goodness! And I just felt like I was seeing what Miss Harshaw saw in Zinka Milanoff's back. It just tremendous expansion. Then holding it out there, it was that was learning how to breathe was a huge thing for me.
For me, again, my voice being a sort of a very light lyric, leggero voice. I look back now and I think, I was a real tenore di grazia, a Tito Schipa kind of voice, or a Valetti kind of voice. Very flexible, high notes for days, And so I think, and so when I came to her, I could already do that. She told me, I remember in the very first lesson, we talked about depth. We talked about, of just everything. And that's what she said. She said, your voice just needs a little more body. And that did it. Mm-hmm. And I remember in that first lesson, I thought it felt totally different. But we did the breath stuff. We did the, the thing where she gets up and she said, I will place your hands. She would always do that. And so you could see about the expansion. And that was kind of a revelation for me. But it really helped me to ground my voice low. Yeah. And to feel that, that expansion and keeping the sternum still, and all of this stuff about letting the lower ribs, the floating ribs, let those expand into the back, mm-hmm. All this kind of stuff. And my voice just took to that like a duck to water. And so it, like I say, from day one, that breathing made a huge difference. And then, of course, it went into throat and all that other stuff. But the support was like I say, that was probably one of the first things that I really noticed, that it made a difference in my voice.
Breath was everything. Breath was everything. If you didn't learn to do that correctly, that meant everything else was going to get a Band-Aid. You were going to have to tweak it. You were going to have to do this or that or whatever. So it started with breath. And I'd finished a 4-year undergrad degree, and I thought I knew how to breathe. Kind of not. All I knew was it took air, and I could take in quite a bit, and the distribution eluded me to a great degree. I was trying to hold on to it. And so the first, I'm going to say, at least semester of my grad work was about breathing. I don't know that I sang through a whole song for 3 months. We would do pieces of lots of different things, and she would want me to feel the ability to pull the breath through my body. And before, everything was just take a lot of air and hold on to it and have that, pressure going down. And I didn't get the other. And I could still make plenty of sound not doing it well. And I think that's why she was so insistent that I really learned to do this right. Because what I was doing was going to not take me very much further. I can get by with a lot of things on youth, and then you can't. You just suddenly are in trouble. And so it was a redo. And that's always frustrating when you're 21, 22 years old. It's like, oh, do I really know nothing? And then, I don't know, one day I just thought, I'm just going to do exactly what she's saying. I'm not going to try to relate it to anything I even know. I am now an open vessel. And it was kind of one of the better decisions I made that year. it's like I watch a lot of baseball now, and it's like when you see the pitcher shaking off the catcher. No, I'm not throwing that. I'm not throwing that. That's the way I went into it in the beginning of, no, I know what I want to do. You tell me what we should be doing together. I'll do my part. You do your part. And it wasn't going well enough. And so now it was kind of like, whatever you want me to throw, I'm going to throw. And that's when it turned around for me in a whole sense of technique. Don't try to reinterpret. Clean. Start clean and do what she's telling you to do. And then suddenly it made more sense. And she would stand up and say, okay. And she would always start with, don't listen to the sound. I no longer make that sound, but I can still do this with my body. And she would put her hand on my hand in her lower belly, and she would just sing a couple notes, or even one long note, to let me feel how she pulled that air through her body. And I'm like, okay. And suddenly I was very excited about it because I could identify something. That was the beginning. And there wasn't a lesson that I didn't kind of redo and re-engage and think about that every single time.
Well, in the first lesson, the same thing I'm sure happened to a lot of people. She calls you over and she stands and places a hand here, your hand on her belly, and then don't worry, I wear a heavy undergarment. and all that, and emphasized right away that we have to release to bring the breath in low, and then just before you sing, you engage that lower tuck in, and it's all then managed. That's not really the word, but let's say balanced by the appoggio, which for me we focused at the sternum a lot. That the sternum itself was as though it were suspended outward. And so appoggio had a lot to do with that sort of fulcrum, and the upper ribs just under the shoulder blade expanding. So all of this is, you could call it support and breathing related. I remember more than once, and this is something I use frequently, she talked about support. Support is about the breath we don't use. And singing on the interest and not the principle, and those kinds of concepts, and some of those words actually she used. As far as breathing and with that full breath, it settles the larynx down. It draws the larynx down to a place that we do not disturb it. We manage that inhale energy. I don't know if she ever called it that. But that adjustment, that place physically that happens during the inhale, and to feel the inhale of the breath, the coolness of the air up on the formerly soft palate, and all the way back and down.
For me, what I remember most is I would have come in, because I came in as a graduate student with her, I would have had some concept of a pulling in below the belly button. She did talk a lot about the birthing muscles. She's like, they're the strongest muscles. Women can pop babies out with them, so you should use them. So I remember her saying that. The other thing is I had no concept at that point of expanded rib cage at all. And I remember she would tell me, all right, when you go to this class in Ballantine Hall, which is a big classroom building about, I don't know, half a mile away, she said, you're going to expand your rib cage and you're not going to collapse it until you get to Ballantine Hall. And then when you come back to the music school, you're going to do the same thing. Because she used to, when she would go to work at the telephone company, she would get, I think, off the bus, and she'd have, I think she said 4 blocks. I could be wrong about how many blocks, but she'd have that many blocks, and she'd expand her rib cage until she got to work. And she said, that's how you're going to strengthen all of that. And the other thing that she talked about that was so helpful for me, because because I was a young woman in those days and always trying to show everybody how thin I was constantly pulling my stomach in, and I could not always release those muscles down there the way I can now. And she talked about the sternum and how the sternum goes forward. And then if the sternum is going forward, well, then those lower abdominal muscles are pulling in. So I could control my sternum. I could control thinking forward with that. And then those muscles cooperated. So if I couldn't always release them in an inhalation, I knew that I could at least get enough air out to get through a phrase. And then they were so far in, they had nothing else to do except come back out. So I have found that with my own students to be super, super helpful, because I think, I teach a lot of people who are exactly in my shoes, and especially if you get an ex-dancer that pops into the studio, and I've had a handful of those that, somewhere along the way they decide to switch into singing instead of dancing, and they really have a hard time releasing. But if I can get their sternum in action, just like she said, it really, really helps. So I would say those are the two big things that I remember that she talked about breathing. But definitely the idea of expanded rib cage, expanding it the whole time, and then pulling in from very, very low. I do remember, and I bet you've gotten this, or you will get it multiple times. She would let you feel her expansion. And you'd get ready. She said, now I'm going to place your hands. And so she would place her hands, and right before she placed your hands, she's like, don't worry, I wear very heavy undergarments. And she did. So, and I've laughed about that with so many other Harshaw students, because I think she did it the exact same way for everyone.
She used to tell me, breathe from your hooses. And she always talked, she didn't necessarily say use your pelvic floor muscles, but she did make a remark once about, by the time you got to the end of a phrase, things were pretty tight down there. The implication being that you could probably hold a quarter between your butt cheeks if required to do so. And she was very emphatic about it. And I was very slim at that time, and she said to me, I'm sure you had your dance lessons as a kid, and your mother always told you hold your stomach in and blah, blah, blah. She said, well, don't. She said, at least not when you take your breath. She said, you can hold it in as you use up that air, but you're going to need to be able to relax your abdomen, the area between your belly button and your crotch at will. So just get over that part. And I did.
So I think when I started with Miss Harshaw, I didn't know. I was singing a lot on my natural abilities with some information that I hadn't really understood. So this was a hard road for her, as it would have been for any teacher. I would say that the first thing she would talk to me about is my back. Especially, we talked so often about the back and how much the back has to do with the strength of the breath support, and how important it was to feel this air coming, and boy, I remember her talking to me about how do you, when you inhale, what do you feel? And I just remember thinking to myself, well, it's strange, but I kind of feel like the air goes like this. And she said, that's absolutely correct. And I'm thinking, I don't know what you're talking about, but I get it. I understand the feeling you're going for. And of course, she would talk to me about feeling it all the way down into my boot, and having this feeling of it's a kind of like a soft strength. I can't, because I don't. She would say, I can remember her saying, if I was singing and somebody bumped into me, well, they'd go cannoning off to the side because I was like this, and that was always hard for me to understand. And even today, it's still hard for me to understand because I didn't get that. I didn't get all that way with her, I suppose. But I was always aware that like it had to start from down here and I had to feel it up here. And this is oddly enough why like Rossini was always difficult for me, because he left me so little time so often for the real breath that I knew my Rossini career was limited. And it wasn't just because I went to Pesaro and heard what real Rossini singers sounded like and people who understand how to do it. I mean, like I knew that wasn't me. So that was those things in particular, especially the back, and especially that feeling of that there's a tucking under, and when that tucking under happened, that was the base that from which all the air flew. And so like I still sing with that feeling all the time. And of course the other thing connected to that breathing had to do with the soft palate, which when the air came in, the soft palate had to raise. And so like that has become a naturally ingrained part of my singing technique, where like happens like that and this thing goes up. I often wish that I'd incorporated it into my speaking, actually. I wish, because often, and it must have been the same for you, I mean, like, I could sing Hofmann twice and not be as tired as singing Hofmann one time, but then having to go to a party afterwards and talk for 2 or 3 hours to people about whatever I was doing. It was I always found that, so I would wake up the next day wrecked. And it was because I didn't treat my speaking voice with the same care as I treated my singing voice.